Welcome to this episode of Mom Enough Live. I'm Erin Erickson here with my mom, Marty Erickson, and our guest, Sarah Reichstad from Kinderberry Hill Child Development Centers, a supporting partner of Mom Enough. And we are so grateful for their support and for the amazing insights and wisdom they can share with us when they join us on these Facebook Live episodes. So, Sarah, we're so happy to have you here today. Sarah has been part of Kinderberry Hill for more than 20 years. While the first half of her career was spent in the classroom and in management roles, Sarah has been the education coordinator for Kinderberry Hill for nearly a decade, and she is a wealth of wisdom on our topic today, which is exploring how children learn to read. So we're going to be comparing it to traditional teaching methods, discuss practical tips for fostering reading skills at home, and we're also going to talk about some strategies for children who are already strong readers. So we hope you'll hang with us as Sarah shares her wisdom with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah.
Thank you. It's really nice to see you guys again, and I'm excited to talk about this topic.
Oh, it's wonderful to see you.
Well, I'm really excited to have you talk about this topic too, because this has been kind of a big controversy and for quite a long time within education circles. And as somebody who started out as a classroom teacher and then special ed teacher and school psychologist, I've really followed this very closely for a long time. And I'm so glad you're talking about this. I wonder if you can start us off with the answer to a pretty basic question, but not always with easy answers.
Yeah.
And that is, what is research showing about how children learn to read?
Yeah, and there's so much research out there. And just to kind of touch on that for a minute, the research is really, this isn't new. This isn't like one study that just came out in the past couple of years. It's been 4 years, and a lot of different fields have looked at it. It's not just the brain guys looking to see how the brain learns, but it's developmental psychologists and communication sciences, and lots of different people have taken a look at actually how we can set the brain up for success in reading, learning the skill of reading. And when we look at the research, there's so much to read out there. I gather 3 big points. The first big point that I'm getting from all the research is that we learn to read sound to sight. So a lot of times when we've taught our own children to read, or when we were taught to read, it's show a letter and name the letter, the sight of it, and then the sound. But our brain really is built so that we process, once we can process that sound, we can tie it to sight easier. Sound is how we learn first. The other thing that the research really shows us is that our brains are wired for speech and language. That is innate. You talk to a baby learns how to talk back. We don't have to move the baby's lips, they figure it out. But when we are talking about reading, that is not hardwired, it is not innate. So just reading to a child and just surrounding a child in print isn't enough. We're going to need to go with that explicit instruction piece. And research is really showing the importance of the phonological piece, phonological awareness, phonemes, basically just sound, the sounds of language. We really need to think about focusing on that. And then the third point that we see is that not enough of our, for sure, elementary school students are reading at grade level.
Yeah.
And so I think that those, mainly when you're reading the research, you're always going to find those things in almost every article.
Well, it's really interesting to hear kind of this alternative kind of, it's like flipping things the other way, because I remember teaching my daughter how to read, and I would show her letters and sounds, like pictures of things, and teach her the sounds, but it was really hard. And we subsequently learned that she had a reading disability, but it does make so much more sense to start with the sound. I mean, when we think about babies, the first thing we do to that baby is, oh, look at you, aren't you so sweet? And, we're talking, we're verbalizing, and that's like the earliest way that we connect with our children. And so that makes so much sense to kind of look at that in a different way. And I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit more about how this compares to how we have taught reading in the past?
Right. I think in the past there were a couple thoughts that came into play. First, it was first of all thinking that children will just store the whole word. We'll just look at a word and kind of memorize that whole picture of the word, if you will. And then another piece that I think influenced it was making sure, and I know myself as a teacher and a parent, wanted to make sure there was a big love of reading. You know, books were our ticket to the world. We could learn everything. You had to love reading, and that was really important to me as both a teacher and a parent. And with that, I think with that probably as a big drive, there's a lot of wanting to give children a bunch of different tools to figure out how to read. So I might be reading with my children, they come on a word they don't know, and I'm going to say, let's look at the illustration. Can we guess? Or what do the other words in the sentence? Or what's the first letter of that word that we can't get? But really, I'm going through every guess first before stepping back, going back to the sounds and sounding out that word. And I think is kind of very common right now for all of us to teach. And a lot of that is from making sure we have a love of reading, because we feel like if we stop them and make them sound out every word, there's like too much work in that. And I really think that pushes a lot of, for myself, for sure, as a parent, is how I was reading with my children.
I want to add a comment to that, and I think you really, summarized that very well. There's another thing that happened quite a while back, and that was that a very charismatic and persuasive person developed a kind of whole language reading approach that people were really drawn into. And it was very hard, and I'm not going to name names or go into the details of that. It's been written about in many places. And this was, way longer ago than 4 years ago when the researcher you're talking about now came out. But this has been around for a long time. And lots of school districts, convinced their school boards and all the powers that be, all the decision makers, to go with this approach. And I think it was almost as if once people dove into that and spent a lot of money on it and, used it with great belief that this was the way, it was very hard to pull back from that, even when a lot of terrific researchers from multiple disciplines, as you've mentioned, were coming out with very rigorous research that was just showing clearly that the phonics and phonemic awareness and all of those things had to be a part of instruction if you were going to really have the majority of children learning to read. Now, some kids will learn to read almost no matter what, if you have books around and you're talking to them and so on. And a lot of parents are kind of natural teachers playing games with the sounds of letters and the sounds of letter combinations, like T for thumb and or TH for thumb, excuse me. I forgot that phonics lesson there. But it's really, really crucial, I think, and it's most unfortunate that kind of refuting of good research really was kind of a massive thing for quite a while. No problem with including whole language kinds of activities, the other things around it, but you have to have that core, I think, is what all the research is saying quite clearly. So I have another question for you. What are some practical tips that we can use at home with children? And I know you're a master of giving practical tips for parents around all kinds of aspects of child development and learning.
Thank you. I think when we're talking about, especially the little ones, most important, let's just play with language, with the sounds of language. And when I say the sounds, really focusing on the sounds, putting the letters later. So maybe it's Marty. Marty. That's Marty's sound. What other sounds have that sound? Mango, man. Don't tie the letters to it yet. Just get that strong sound foundation first. That's the way the brain is wired. And then also thinking about ways we can just play with language through rhymes, making up silly word rhymes. They don't have to be real words. They sound the same at the end, they rhyme. Singing. I think sometimes we forget music is really important. Some of the research says that children that can keep a beat or match pitch are showing better reading skills. So thinking about, we don't have to be good singers, we just got to sing and get the kids singing too. Those are all great ways to really work on that sound piece of the brain. And then little things showing, for example, let's take the book Boom Chicka Boom. This, here's this letter, or I don't even need to say the letter yet. Give that strong foundation. Boom, ba, boom, chicka. There it is again. Ba, boom. Just that pointing really to the sounds. It's hard for us. We kind of have to flip the way that we were taught, probably. But those would be my tips. The other thing, I think, don't forget about environment that you see every day. You see the stop sign. That's telling us something. There's print on your cereal box. So that's telling us something. Just letting children know that print has a message, that you can learn something from that. Those symbols tell us something. I think even that concept is a great place to start for the little ones and for the younger ones.
Well, those are such practical tips. I wish I'd known all this when my kids were younger. And I was really struck by something my daughter did when she was in high school. She interviewed a school psychologist and wanted to learn more about how children are taught to read and the programs they're using for children who are struggling. And she was really kind of struck by this idea that we should be implementing the methods that we use to teach children who have challenges with learning to read to everybody. Because if we just implement that in the first place, then it's going to matter less that we have all these special, services that we need to implement, because we have a shortage of the services for children who need them. Even though there's law that specifies this, we're having challenges in education to hire enough people. And so if we can have everybody trained in implementing these approaches, even those children who are struggling will learn. And I just thought that was a really wonderful thing for my daughter, who had that struggle. Now, of course, she's not struggling anymore. She's a very successful college student, but that is a new way forward, and that we really have the evidence to support how to do this. It's just a matter of getting it in place. Now, I'm thinking about kids who might be strong readers already. Are there things that we could be doing for those older children to continue to support their journey in reading and fostering a love of reading as well?
Yeah, once the goal of the parents and the teachers, once the child learns to read, yay, we did it. I've got a reader. They know how to read now. And then the switch of that for the older children, so they learn to read, but then they need to read to learn. And that's that comprehension piece. And that actually is, I think, harder because sometimes as adults we're like, oh, our job's done. They're good readers. The rest is, whether it's up to the school or up to the class, they'll assign the reading that they have to figure out what they're, reading instructions or whatever it is. But when we look at how we can support them at home, when I take my son, he would take a graphic novel over anything. History of the world, he'll say, do they have it in a graphic novel? And I'll get him the graphic novel, but then I think to further challenge our children, I can find a news article on something related. He's interested in hockey. I can pull up Wikipedia on his favorite hockey star, and we can read that together. Just offering those different sources that pertain to the interests. Taylor Swift fan, I'll get her the People magazine. Like, there's just things that we can do that are challenge them within their interests, a different type of text, and above their level. I think those are the key things.
Yeah, that's so important. And I really appreciate what you talked about there is finding the reading material that your child is interested in. So it doesn't really matter if they're reading a book that is, like a historical fiction or a nonfiction book, or if they're reading a graphic novel or a magazine, getting them reading. But I really appreciate taking that a step further of finding what they're interested in and then showing them how reading can be used to find all sorts of information. And I see this with my younger son, who's, I'm amazed at the things he knows. And it's because, well, he's figured it out. There's a lot of information out there. And if you read it, you can know it. So, I mean, reading really is key to learning. And so that's just such a great suggestion. And we're just so grateful for your wisdom and insights. And I always just really appreciate how practical your tips are, how we can go home and implement these things right away. It's just so helpful. And we're so grateful for Kinderberry Hill for sharing you with us and our audience, and for all the great work they're doing as well to ensure that children have evidence-based access to early learning. So thank you so much, Sarah Reichstadt, for joining us. And thank you, Mom, for co-hosting with me.
Good to be here.
Yeah, and thanks to all of you for tuning in today. We hope you'll tune in again for our next Facebook Live. More on that on our Facebook page. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of the week.